What would you do if a single outsider's rule threatened to erase every memory your family built, right where you stand? This isn't just about barbecue. It's about the day a line in the grass became a line in the sand, and one act of quiet defiance set an entire neighborhood on fire. The badge was the first thing I saw, sunlight flashing off metal, slicing through the blue smoke rising from my grill. Before she spoke, I felt her, the sharp perfume of power, the heavy footsteps trampling my lawn. She stood there, blue clipboard drawn like a weapon, eyes scanning for weakness. "You're in violation," she snapped, her words louder than the crackle of ribs. "No open flames." You received notice, no hesitation, no empathy. Just a verdict delivered by someone who'd never earned the right. I didn't move. I let the smoke and memory fill my lungs. My daughter's laughter, my father's old recipes, the legacy built right here. Neighbors watched from their windows, waiting for one of us to flinch. In that moment, I knew. This wasn't about fire. It was about erasing everything that made this house home. I didn't blink. I just turned a rack of ribs, the tongs clicking as slow as my pulse, and nodded toward the edge of my lawn. "You might want to check who signed those notices," I said quietly, not looking up. "This lot predates your bylaws by 3 years. City exemption, Section 5. Her eyes narrowed, and for a second, her smug confidence faltered. "Would you risk your dinner, let alone your home, if you thought someone could take it away with a single phone call? Let me know if you've ever watched someone flex authority over something you built with your own hands. Keep listening. Because this wasn't just a backyard squabble. It was the start of the biggest fight Timber Meadow ever saw. They call me Sam Archer. To most, I'm just the neighbor with the endless cookouts, the guy who knows where the power lines run and how to rig a generator when the storms roll through. But there's more to it. My father built this house, poured concrete with his bare hands, and left me the kind of legacy that isn't measured in property value. It's measured in Sunday afternoons like this. Smoke curling through the trees, my daughter's laughter rising above the hiss of the coals. That's why the board's no grilling rule wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an insult to everything my family ever stood for. Patricia Lansing didn't see it that way. As president of the Timber Meadow Homeowners Association, she had a taste for order, a gift for threats that came wrapped in legalese, and a talent for making even the friendliest block party feel like a criminal conspiracy. She'd made her rounds before, complaints about mailbox paint, garden heights, the sound of a football game drifting past dusk. But this was different. This time, she brought backup. I heard the sirens before I saw the squad car. A pair of deputies climbed out, one young and nervous, the other built like he'd seen too many hard years. The older man's badge said Sheriff Dalton. He moved with slow purpose, surveying the scene, then tipped his hat at my grill and let out the kind of laugh that's half memory, half rebellion. "Best smell on this street," he said, loud enough for the board president to hear. "Ever had a moment when you wanted to see a bully lose control? Stick around. Because what happened on my lawn that day didn't just challenge the rules, it challenged who got to make them." I looked down at the fire, remembering every holiday spent right here. Every story my daughter asked about her grandfather, every neighbor who wandered over for a plate after a storm. It wasn't just barbecue, it was the last thing tying us to the man we lost, to the lessons that made this house our home. She was already lecturing the sheriff about emergency enforcement and mandatory removal, rattling off sections of the CCRS like scripture. Sheriff Dalton didn't even bother looking at her paperwork. He walked over, reached for a plate, and gave me a wink that said more than any signature ever could. "Got any hot links?" he asked. The young deputy stifled a grin. If you've ever felt the surge of relief when someone in power chooses decency over paperwork, drop a like and let me know where you're watching from. This showdown was just beginning, and Timber Meadow would never be the same. I watched the board's president's face go from pink to white to an ugly, quivering red. She threatened citations. She threatened escalation. She even threatened to call in the fire marshal, anything to prove she couldn't be outmaneuvered by a spatula and a smile. But with every word, the crowd in the street grew. Neighbors edged closer, drawn by the smell of ribs and the promise of a reckoning. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. The land, the house, the barbecue, all of it spoke for me. When the sheriff took his first bite, the board president's control slipped just a little more. That was when I realized this wasn't about rules. It was about who had the right to feel at home. Where are you watching from? Because if you've ever been told to sit down and shut up on your own property, you're about to watch what happens when someone finally stands up. I stood there, grill smoke still curling behind me, as Patricia Lansing retreated across the lawn, her heels stabbing divots into the grass. Sheriff Dalton chatted with the growing crowd, his plate already empty, and I could feel the tension rippling through Timber Meadow like a storm front. Neighbors who usually nodded from driveways now lingered at the curb, curiosity flickering in their eyes, most of them waiting to see if this time someone would finally tell the board to back off. If you've ever seen authority start to wobble, you know the feeling. A hush, a ripple of hope, and that nervous shift when people realize the rules might be changing right in front of them. I caught my daughter's eye, Olivia, arms folded tight, pride shining just beneath her worry. For her, every summer, cookout was more than a meal. It was a link to her grandfather, a story on every plate. Watching her pack up, Olivia smiled for the first time all day. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to a bully in your own neighborhood, and subscribe to see how this fight is about to turn a whole community around. She didn't go quietly. She huddled with her vice president, my reluctant ally, on the edge of the sidewalk, both of them firing off texts and snapping photos of my grill like evidence in a crime scene. From across the street, Mrs. Bryant, the neighborhood's unofficial historian, shook her head and muttered, "He's got the city code on his side." She didn't say it loudly, but the words spread fast. As the crowd drifted, I found myself walking the block, checking on neighbors, listening to their quiet, anxious stories. Most were tired of the constant notices, the fines for lawn height, the warnings about toys left in yards. Mr. Lee, who'd lived on the corner since before the HOA was formed, leaned on his cane and told me, "Used to be, you could have a birthday party without worrying about permits." I saw the resignation in his eyes, the way people start to accept a smaller life just to avoid the next fight. It wasn't just the old-timers. Younger families, new arrivals, whispered about the board president's endless inspections and the rumors that she'd tried to shut down a kid's lemonade stand for lacking a temporary vendor license. Even Mark Donnelly, usually her shadow, seemed rattled by the pushback. I watched him, phone in hand, scowling at the text he'd just received, probably from someone higher up, wondering why the sheriff was eating barbecue instead of shutting it down. By sundown, the street felt different. My phone buzzed with messages, some anonymous, others from neighbors I barely knew. Most were short. "Thanks for standing up. Let us know if you need anything." About time someone pushed back. It was small, but it was the start of something. Inside, Olivia set the dinner table while I washed up, the smell of smoke still clinging to my shirt. "Are we in trouble?" she asked, her voice low but steady. I shook my head. "Not if we stick together. Not if we remember why this matters." I glanced at the old frame photo on the counter, my dad, arms around a much younger me, both of us grinning by that same grill. For a moment, I felt him there, steadying my resolve. After dinner, I settled near the window, gaze fixed on the slow sweep of headlights tracing lazy circles down the street. The sedan lingered in front of my home, engine humming quietly, every light switched off, a silent threat, meant to rattle more than just my nerves. But years spent unraveling the secrets of this neighborhood, mapping the pipes beneath the lawns, memorizing safety codes, tracing the fine print of city exemptions, had prepared me for moments like this. No matter how many times intimidation circled my door, I knew every hidden advantage buried beneath this old block. She could try to intimidate, but I'd spent too long mastering the rules to be undone by a scare tactic. A little before midnight, I heard a quiet knock at the door. It was Mrs. Bryant, holding a faded manila envelope. "You'll want this," she whispered. Inside were photocopies of Timber Meadow's original development plan, proof that our lot, and a handful of others, were legally exempt from half the HOA's rules, the first break in their armor. If you've ever felt a door open just when you needed it most, drop a like and let me know. Because sometimes, the smallest acts of courage are what start to turn the tide. By the time I went to bed, the air outside was heavy with anticipation. She might have started this fight, but the neighborhood was waking up, and Timber Meadow was about to remember what real community looked like. Mrs. Bryant's living room always smelled faintly of old books and cinnamon, a space where neighborhood secrets seemed to gather in the corners. I sat across from her, the manila envelope open on her coffee table, blueprints and faded correspondence spread between us. Olivia played quietly in the hallway, her voice a low murmur that barely reached my ears. I glanced out the window at the street, empty now, but carrying the memory of Patricia's car, idling in the darkness. Before I could ask about the documents, Mrs. Bryant pressed a wrinkled finger to her lips and tilted her head toward the front door. A moment later, it creaked open, and my reluctant ally stepped inside. He looked different without the board president at his side, jacket rumpled, tie askew, his jaw set but his eyes uncertain. He hovered in the entryway, glancing at me, then at Mrs. Bryant, like he was unsure which of us posed the greater threat. "Close the door, Mark," Mrs. Bryant said softly. "You're among friends now, whether you want to admit it or not." He obeyed, his hands twisting nervously as he approached the table. There was a silence thick as syrup, broken only by the shuffle of blueprints as I slid them across for him to see. He didn't sit right away. He stood behind a worn armchair, knuckles whitening on the faded fabric, gaze flicking between the papers and my face. "Patricia's pushing too hard," he muttered, barely above a whisper. "The board. We're supposed to keep things fair. But she's making it personal. She always has." The admission seemed to cost him. I studied him, his posture rigid, breath shallow, eyes darting toward the window every time a car passed. My reluctant ally wasn't just afraid of the board president. He was afraid of himself, of what it meant to stand against her after so many years at her side. I could almost see the argument playing out behind his eyes. Loyalty versus conscience, order versus what was right. "You knew about these exemptions?" I asked, keeping my tone even. He nodded, looking away. "I did. I tried to say something once. She shot me down in front of everyone, said the board's word was law, and I should remember who put me in this seat." His hands shook as he reached for a copy of the development plan, tracing the bold signature of a long-dead city planner. I told myself it didn't matter, that if I just did my job, nobody would get hurt. But she keeps moving the line. Mrs. Bryant patted his arm, her eyes kind but sharp. "That's what they all say, until it's their turn on the wrong end of a violation." She glanced at me, then back at Mark. "You want to do the right thing, son? Here's your chance. But you can't straddle the fence forever." He hesitated, shoulders sagging. "It's not just me," he said. "She's got a file on everyone. If I cross her, it won't just be my seat I lose. My wife. She's already had run-ins over our garden fence. I keep thinking if I keep my head down, maybe we'll be safe." The confession came out in a rush, years of quiet complicity boiling over into shame. The urge to press him, to demand he act, bubbled up in my chest. But I remembered the look in Olivia's eyes that afternoon. The hope, the belief that standing up mattered. Sometimes people needed time to find their courage. I offered my reluctant ally the envelope. "You don't have to decide tonight. But if you want to help this neighborhood, really help, this is how you start." He took the envelope, hands trembling. I'll think about it," he said. He looked at Mrs. Bryant, then at me, searching for something. Absolution maybe, or just the assurance he wasn't alone. "You're right. She's gone too far." As he slipped out into the night, I watched from the window as he paused at the curb, envelope clutched to his chest. For the first time, the board's shadow seemed to flicker. Maybe, just maybe, the wall was beginning to crack. Drop a like if you've ever watched someone finally face their fear, and if you want to see what Mark decides, stick around. The next move was out of my hands. But for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. Smoke curled over the picnic tables, drifting through the swings and jungle gym, where a handful of kids played, their laughter oddly muffled beneath the weight of a watchful crowd. I could taste anticipation in the air, mixed with grilled onions, charcoal, and the tang of suspicion. Our neighborhood BBQ was supposed to be a break from the HOA's reach, a rare day when we could just be neighbors instead of suspects. But today, the lines were drawn sharper than ever. She showed up late, as if the attention belonged to her by right, flanked by a clipboard and a stiff-backed enforcer whose pressed jacket still carried the faint creases of last week's board meeting. They cut through the line of neighbors at the grill, barely glancing at the faces turning to watch. The smile she wore looked more like a warning, tight at the corners, eyes flicking across the park in search of a challenge. By the swings, a familiar figure lingered at the edge of the playground, hands buried in his pockets, skin almost as pale as the afternoon sun. He met my gaze only for a moment, then dropped his eyes to the mulch, an unspoken apology hanging between us. The sheriff, Ben Hartley, stood by the grill, cracking jokes with my father-in-law while flipping sausages. He didn't flinch as she approached, just raised an eyebrow and offered her a plate. She waved him off, turning instead to the gathered crowd. Her voice rang out, cool and authoritative, slicing through the chatter. "I see some of us are enjoying the amenities today. But let's not forget, regulations apply at all times, especially for outdoor cooking and gatherings. Unauthorized BBQs will result in citations and possible suspension of community privileges." A few heads turned in my direction, and I felt a slow, angry flush rise to my cheeks. My wife squeezed my hand, a silent show of solidarity. Olivia looked up from the sandbox, worry flickering in her eyes. I forced a calm smile, but inside, something shifted. The board president wasn't just targeting me. She wanted a public spectacle. The sheriff watched her with open curiosity, his badge glinting in the sunlight. I stepped forward, keeping my voice even. "Patricia, this BBQ's been on the community calendar for months. My permits are in order. You can check with City Hall." I pulled out my phone, opening the scanned permits, and showed her the digital copy. She didn't even look, just shook her head with a dismissive click of her tongue. "Permits or not, we reserve the right to enforce community standards. And if you think clever paperwork will save you, you might want to read the fine print." She turned to the crowd, a performative sigh escaping her lips. "We can't make exceptions just because someone thinks they're above the rules." A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. Some faces showed sympathy. Others kept their expressions carefully blank. I could see Mark watching, torn, his jaw clenched. The sense of isolation grew, but so did my resolve. This was no longer about a grill. It was about who held the power to define what our neighborhood could be. Ben Hartley set down his spatula and joined us, standing between the board president and the grill. He regarded her with a quiet steadiness that somehow made her even more flustered. "I'm happy to check any paperwork if there's a real issue," he said. "But from what I see, everyone's just enjoying themselves." She glared at him, then turned her attention back to me. "Consider this your final warning," she hissed. The playground fell strangely silent. Even the kids stopped mid-swing, watching the grown-ups with wide, uncertain eyes. I realized then that what happened in this park wasn't just for the adults. It shaped what our children would remember about standing up or shrinking back. The scent of burnt sugar and grass mixed in the air. And for a second, I saw myself as a kid again, fearless on these same swings, never doubting that grown-ups would do the right thing. I wasn't about to let that memory fade for Olivia, or for any of them. Just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Next time, I won't be so generous." The words hung in the air, a public dare. I kept my expression neutral, but every muscle in my body tensed. I'd spent years solving problems with logic and expertise. Today, that wasn't enough. She was making it personal, raising the stakes for everyone watching. As the sun set and the BBQ wound down, neighbors approached me quietly, some offering encouragement, others just wanting to know what would happen next. The sheriff lingered by my side, his calm presence a silent vote of confidence. My wife slipped her arm through mine. Olivia tugged at my sleeve, and for a moment, I remembered why I was fighting in the first place. Drop a like if you've ever had to stand up to someone who thought their rules were the only rules that mattered. And stick around, because this story's just getting started. The Monday after the BBQ, I woke to the sound of a leaf blower, a too early reminder that, in Timber Oaks, peace was always conditional. Coffee in hand, I stepped out to the curb just as Mark Donnelly, the HOA's conflicted secretary, made a hasty turn onto my street. His car slowed, windows down, and he tossed a nervous wave before parking across from my house. He'd barely gotten out before Patricia's latest notice, bold, yellow, and taped right to my mailbox, flapped in the morning breeze. Unauthorized gathering, formal review, pending. My stomach twisted. I looked over at my wife, who gave me a worried smile from the porch, her arms folded tight against the chill. "They're not going to let up," she whispered. Olivia peeked around her legs, backpack already on, and I ruffled her hair, promising everything would be all right. The words felt thinner with every new escalation. After they left, I turned my focus to the equipment shed at the edge of my backyard. I wasn't looking for hidden files or some magic clause. My strength had always been knowing the systems most people ignored. The HOA's electrical grid, the outdoor outlets, the water main shutoffs. Over years of volunteering, I'd mapped it all in my head. Today, that knowledge became a shield. I ran a routine check on the outdoor circuits, tracing lines from the grill's hookup to the community panel, double-checking voltage logs. Something felt off. I'd been hearing complaints about flickering lights at the pool, odd surges in the security system, even strange outages during recent events, always blamed on resident misuse. It never made sense, but nobody looked closer. I fired up my laptop and connected to the logs I'd quietly installed during a maintenance shift months before. Sure enough, the timestamp data told a story. Every power surge during community events traced back to the HOA panel, not resident equipment. Her unauthorized gatherings were a convenient excuse, covering for old, uninspected wiring that hadn't been brought up to code in years. That was my edge. The HOA was using rulebook threats to hide their own neglect. I knew I had to move carefully. The board president wasn't just stubborn, she was vindictive, and Mark's silence said more than words ever could. But as I scrolled through the data, screenshotting evidence and cross-referencing outages with board meeting dates, my confidence grew. If they wanted a review, I'd give them one. This wasn't about a BBQ, it was about public safety, and they'd left a paper trail only a professional would notice. Mid-morning, my reluctant ally approached while I was raking leaves, his steps hesitant. "Hey," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. "Patricia's doubling down. She's calling for a full board review next week. Wants to make an example." I nodded, trying to keep the tension out of my voice. "Good. I've got some questions she's not going to like." He looked torn, his fingers fidgeting with his phone. He lowered his voice, urgency leaking through. "Just be careful. She's got the president on her side. I'll do what I can." Then he slipped away, shoulders hunched, as if he was carrying more than just HOA guilt. Inside, I spent hours piecing together my findings, timestamps, utility reports, photos of corroded panels, even the city code violations that everyone else ignored. I created a backup drive and tucked it in a kitchen drawer, just in case. My wife watched from the doorway, her eyes tracing the lines of worry on my face. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. "But promise me you'll keep us out of the crosshairs." "I promise," I said, even as I wondered if that was one I could really keep. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed a board president's threat, Mark's warning, the growing web of fear spreading through Timber Oaks. But underneath it all was a steady thrum of resolve. This was the moment my skills would finally matter, not just for my family, but for every neighbor who'd been bullied into silence. If you've ever found a hidden flaw nobody else saw, or turned your expertise into a weapon against injustice, drop a like. The real fight was about to begin. That night, sleep was nothing but fragments, half dreams of grilling in the backyard, shattered by the glare of HOA, notices taped to every door. When the sun finally crept over Timber Oaks, I was already awake, hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, reviewing my evidence. For the 100th time. Outside, the neighborhood felt different, tense, watchful, as if the entire street was holding its breath. After breakfast, I took a walk with Olivia, determined to give her something normal, just a father and daughter, side by side, kicking pebbles and talking about the soccer game that weekend. She asked why the mean lady hated our grill. I didn't have a good answer. "Sometimes people get power, and they use it the wrong way," I told her. "But we don't give up, okay?" She nodded, clutching my hand a little tighter. Halfway down the block, I saw Mark Donnelly standing in his driveway, head bowed, a phone pressed to his ear. His shoulders sagged, every inch the conflicted witness, caught between doing what's right and staying invisible. As I passed, he glanced up, guilt flashing in his eyes. Before I could say anything, he turned away, still not ready to pick a side. I made my way to the community park, the heart of Timber Oaks, where a handful of families were setting up for the spring festival. It should have been a happy scene, but the usual laughter was absent, replaced by wary glances and whispered conversations. The board president and her inner circle were there, clipboard in hand, already scanning for infractions. As I passed, she fixed me with a cold smile, the kind that promised trouble. By mid-morning, word had spread about the upcoming board review. I could feel the neighborhood bracing, some rooting for us, some just desperate to avoid attention. Mrs. Vega, who lived 2 doors down, caught me by the swings. "They're saying you're reckless," she whispered, worry creasing her brow, "that you're putting everyone at risk." I shook my head. "I'm not the one who's been ignoring real dangers. The board's covering their own mistakes. I can prove it." Back home, I dug deeper, pulling up the city's public inspection records for Timber Oaks. My heart pounded as I found what I was looking for. An old citation, barely mentioned at a board meeting 3 years ago, warning about immediate corrective action on the HOA's outdoor wiring. She had signed the response, promising repairs, but the follow-up was never logged. That detail stuck with me. In my line of work, little things, the unsigned inspection, the skipped follow-up, were always the real red flags. I wondered how many times she had leaned on that habit, trusting nobody would notice. But details had always been my edge, whether rewiring a circuit or piecing together the real story. I felt that old, stubborn pride in my chest, the same feeling I used to get fixing things with my dad. Maybe this was my chance to fix something bigger than a grill or a breaker. I checked my own photos against the original inspectors. Same rust, same corrosion. Nothing had been fixed. I took a risk, calling the city's code enforcement office. After a few transfers and a long wait, I found a sympathetic ear. I explained the situation without naming names, and the official promised to look into it quietly before the review. "If what you're saying is true, this could be a serious liability," she said. I thanked her, feeling a new surge of hope and a prick of fear. Patricia wouldn't go down without a fight. Later, I watched Olivia ride her bike with the neighbor kids, their laughter a fragile reminder of what we were fighting for. My wife joined me on the porch, her voice quiet. "You sure you want to push this?" she asked. "What if it makes things worse?" I stared at the sunlit street, the carefully manicured lawns, and all the little signs of life that made Timber Oaks a home worth defending. "If I back down now, what do I teach her?" I said, nodding toward Olivia. "That fear wins? That the loudest voice gets to make the rules?" She slipped her arm through mine, squeezing gently. "Then let's make sure we win." As dusk settled, a police cruiser rolled slowly down the street, a visible reminder that the stakes were rising. She stood at the end of her driveway, phone in hand, no doubt dialing up the pressure. But this time, the officer stopped in front of our house. He stepped out, tipping his hat politely. "Evening, mister." "Taylor, just wanted to check in. Got a couple of anonymous calls about unsafe gatherings here." His voice was kind, his eyes understanding. "Mind if I take a look around?" I nodded, welcoming him inside, confident in the truth. He walked the perimeter, inspected the grill's connection, glanced at my folder of evidence, and smiled. "Looks like you know what you're doing," he said quietly, handing me his card. "If you need anything, you let me know." Some folks in this neighborhood like to stir the pot. As the cruiser pulled away, I stood on the porch, watching Patricia watch me, her face a mask of frustration. For the first time, she looked uncertain. In that moment, I realized the tide was turning. My expertise wasn't just a defense, it was a sword, and the board's fear of exposure was growing. The real battle would be public soon, but tonight, Timber Oaks belonged to the people who lived here, not the ones who ruled by fear. Where are you watching from? Because this fight's about to go from quiet resistance to open confrontation, and nobody's backing down. The next morning, the air in Timber Oaks felt charged, as if the entire neighborhood was waiting for something to snap. I was up before sunrise, flipping through my evidence again, searching for any overlooked detail. My phone buzzed, an anonymous text. "Be careful. Patricia's calling an emergency board meeting." I didn't recognize the number, but my gut told me exactly who was watching from the shadows. Instead of lingering at home, I headed to the community gym, a spot I rarely visited, but one where gossip flowed as freely as sweat. The place was nearly empty, except for Mark Donnelly, hunched over a treadmill console, pretending not to see me. I took the machine beside him, silence hanging heavy. His reflection in the mirror looked older, more tired than I remembered. Finally he spoke, barely louder than a whisper. "You're not the only one she's threatened, you know." My heart jumped. I kept my voice steady. "What did she promise you, Mark?" He hesitated, hands tightening on the rails. "Said she'd revoke my parking spot, maybe worse." Said the HOA can make your life hell if you don't cooperate. He glanced around, voice dropping even lower. She's hiding more than just those bad wires. There's a leak, under the pool, old inspection covered up. For a moment, I caught a flicker of hope in his eyes, like he'd finally let himself imagine a way out. The weight on his shoulders was plain, but so was the fear that had kept him quiet for so long. I thought about all the neighbors who'd looked the other way, or just kept their heads down. Sometimes silence is louder than any accusation, and right now, it was starting to break. He swallowed, his internal struggle plain in the set of his jaw and the way his eyes darted toward the exit. I've got emails, but I can't be seen handing them over. A tension hung between us. For the first time, I saw how deeply the board's threats had sunk their claws, not just into Mark, but into half the street. You don't have to stand in front of everyone, I told him. Just the truth is enough. He nodded, biting his lip. I'll forward you what I can. But if this blows back, I was never here. Back outside, I checked my phone. Minutes later, a series of encrypted emails arrived, each one a piece of the puzzle. Delayed maintenance logs, unsigned inspection reports, messages between the board president and the pool contractor discussing optics and delaying repairs until after dues season. It was more than I'd hoped for. His conscience had tipped the scales. At lunchtime, I met with Sheriff Daniels in his small, window-lined office at the edge of town. He greeted me with a knowing smile, flipping through the evidence I'd brought. People don't realize, he said, tapping the emails, how much HOA trouble winds up in my lap. But this is organized negligence. He paused, locking eyes with me. You ready for this to go public? It's going to get messy before it gets better. I nodded, steeling myself. For my family? For everyone who's been scared into silence? I'm ready. We discussed next steps. Daniels offered to be present at the board review, not as a threat, but as a witness to keep things civil. Sometimes, he said, the only way to break a bad habit is to shine a little daylight on it. The afternoon dragged. I spent it in the neighborhood cafe, piecing together timelines and cross-referencing evidence. Around me, neighbors whispered, glancing my way but never lingering long enough for conversation. Timber Oaks was stirring, but most were still too cautious to act. As dust settled in, my wife found me at the kitchen table, buried under files. It's not just us anymore, is it? She asked softly, brushing a hand across my back. No, I answered, feeling the weight, but also a strange sense of relief. We're all in this together now. Olivia peeked into the room, clutching a crayon drawing. Is the bad lady going away? She asked, eyes hopeful. I smiled and pulled her into my lap. We're working on it, sweetheart. We're working hard. That evening as the sun bled out behind the oaks, I sat on the porch and watched as Mark walked his dog past our house. He didn't wave, but there was a subtle nod. A quiet alliance formed in the crucible of fear and courage. A few other neighbors lingered outside, sharing wary glances. It felt like the first cracks in the wall she had built. The board review was coming, and for the first time, I had more than just my word. I had the truth, a witness, and a growing swell of support behind me. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Patricia's smirk and Mark's haunted eyes, replaying the gym conversation over and over. Dawn brought a thin gray light and a cold determination. I had to turn this evidence into a plan, and I had to do it fast. I left my phone charging on the kitchen counter and drove across town to my workplace, the small but state-of-the-art fire safety consulting firm where I'd made my career. It was early enough that the office was quiet, just the faint hum of the air conditioning and the click of my own keyboard echoing in the empty space. I pulled up a blank document, organized every shred of evidence Mark had sent, and laid it out against the HOA's own bylaws. For every violation, I created a chart. Every missing inspection, every delayed repair, every email reference to keep this quiet, it all became part of a timeline that made her pattern of negligence impossible to ignore. It wasn't just about protecting my family anymore. This was about the whole neighborhood. Kids who swam in that pool, seniors who trusted the board to keep sidewalks safe, new families who'd never known the community before it was ruled by threats and fear. For the first time, I felt a righteous anger propelling me forward. This was my skill set, my home turf. I knew how to build a case so airtight that even the slickest lawyer couldn't wiggle free. Mid-morning, I called Sheriff Daniels. He answered on the first ring. "I've got everything," I told him, "not just the pool leak. There are multiple documented code violations, and I've got witness statements ready if needed." Daniel's tone sharpened. "I'll see you at the review. I'll be in uniform this time. They won't be able to sweep this under the rug." Hearing his certainty gave me a much-needed jolt of confidence. I reached out next to Emily Carter, a local journalist who'd covered community issues for years. I kept my tone careful, factual, offering her the outline of what I'd found without naming sources. "If you're interested in a story about how one HOA tried to silence its own residents and how it backfired, let's talk." She agreed to meet after the review, her voice crackling with anticipation. "This is what I live for," she said. By lunch, I'd finalized a color-coded presentation, a single binder packed with everything: photos, emails, inspection records, annotated maps. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. Olivia helped me slip the binder into my satchel, giving it a gentle pat. "Is this going to help the neighbors too?" she asked, her small voice filled with hope. I nodded, pulling her into a hug. "That's exactly why we're doing this." I spent the afternoon canvassing the neighborhood, not to gather more evidence, but to quietly reassure those who'd been threatened. I stopped by Mrs. Nguyen's porch, the Smith's front yard, even waved at him from a distance. "Things are changing," I told anyone who would listen. "You don't have to be scared anymore." Each conversation, each nervous smile, chipped away at Patricia's control. I saw it in the way people lingered on their lawns, watching me walk by. Uncertainty giving way to a fragile kind of trust. The real breakthrough came at dusk. Sheriff Daniels texted me. "City inspector has been briefed. He's reviewing the pool records now." The cavalry was coming, not just one voice, but a coalition of law, media, and neighbors all ready to stand up together. The showdown was no longer just a personal vendetta. It was a reckoning, years overdue. That evening, I set the binder on the dining room table and let myself breathe for the first time all day. Olivia fell asleep in my lap, her head rising and falling with each breath. My wife stood at the window, watching the street. "Do you think they'll finally listen?" she whispered. I squeezed her hand, feeling the history of every sleepless night, every small victory and setback. "They have to," I said, "because this time, we're not alone." If you've ever wondered what it takes to turn fear into power, stick around. The next meeting was about to be more than a showdown. It would be a turning point for Timber Oaks. The morning of the board review arrived with a chill in the air, a rare, overcast sky settling over Timber Oaks. I woke before sunrise, barely tasting my coffee, already cycling through scenarios in my head. This was the day everything needed to align. I loaded my binder, checked Olivia's school bag, and kissed my wife goodbye at the door, promising I'd call the moment I had news. As I stepped outside, I noticed more neighbors than usual tending to their yards, heads turning, nods exchanged, nervous half smiles. Word had spread, and for once, it felt like people weren't looking away. The HOAs, Recreation Center, usually reserved for birthday parties and book clubs, felt like enemy territory today. As I walked toward the center, the early sunlight glinted off parked cars, and I heard snippets of conversations, low, tense, but threaded with cautious optimism. I passed the Nguyen family, Mrs. Bryant in her sun hat, and a group of teens who usually avoided anything official. Today, everyone was here for the same reason. For the first time, it felt like Timber Oaks wasn't just a collection of houses, but a community waking up from a long sleep. The building buzzed with tension. Patricia arrived first, flanked by Marcus and Shelley, the board's silent vote and its note-taker. They avoided my gaze, but their body language screamed anxiety. Sheriff Daniels was already waiting, crisp in his uniform, radiating calm authority. His presence changed everything. No more backroom threats, no more empty warnings. Emily Carter, notepad in hand, lingered by the coffee urn, her eyes tracking every nervous board member. I handed her a brief nod, grateful she was there as both witness and future storyteller. As residents trickled in, the seats filled with faces both supportive and skeptical. Mark was there too, standing at the back, arms folded, trying to disappear into the wall. Our eyes met, just for a second, and that was enough. He knew he wasn't alone. Patricia called the session to order, her voice steady but tight. "We're here to address allegations regarding unsafe conditions and the conduct of our board." She tried to sound in control, but the tremor in her hands gave her away. I waited for the procedural opening, my binder resting like a silent dare on the table in front of me. Daniel sat at my right, Emily just behind. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. The first few minutes dragged, formalities, roll calls, a stilted reading of community values. But then, as the floor opened for evidence, I stood. The room hushed. My voice felt steadier than I expected. I've documented a pattern of code violations and willful neglect that put every family at risk. I began, flipping open the binder. Here are the original inspection records, city code requirements, dated photos, and email trails. Every single instance where policy was ignored or residents were silenced. Every new page I turned, every color-coded detail that flickered on the screen, chipped away at the board's confidence. Attempts at distraction came quick. Deflections, interruptions, voices raised just long enough to muddy the water. But Daniels, steady as ever, cut through the noise. Let's let the evidence speak. Across the room, the city inspector gave a slow, deliberate nod, confirming everything. Hazardous leaks beneath the pool, playground equipment long overdue for repairs, maintenance logs signed off and forgotten. In the fluorescent light, the mask of composure began to slip. Beads of sweat traced the edges of self-assurance, and the illusion of control faltered with every fact laid bare. That's when Mark, quiet, hesitant Mark, stood from the back of the room. He cleared his throat. I know this is hard to hear, but everything you're seeing is real. I've seen the board delay repairs, fudge paperwork. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. His voice wavered, but his words landed like a hammer. She tried to object, but the crowd had shifted. The atmosphere was no longer just tense. It was electric with the sense that real change was possible. Neighbors began murmuring, some audibly angry, others emboldened. The illusion of HOA invincibility was finally breaking. Emily jotted notes at a furious pace. Sheriff Daniels made it clear, "We'll be recommending an outside audit." I could almost hear people breathing easier, the communal pulse finally quickening with hope instead of fear. The board president slumped in her chair, silent for the first time in any meeting I'd ever seen. Her supporters shrank back, realizing the room had changed. The board was outnumbered, not just in votes, but in the moral force of the community finally united. When the session ended, neighbors approached quietly, some with questions, others with quiet thanks. Emily promised her story would run by the weekend. Daniels shook my hand and said, "You did it the right way. They'll think twice before they try this again." As I walked home beneath the late morning clouds, Olivia's laughter echoed from the schoolyard across the street, and I finally let myself hope that Timber Oaks would never fall silent again. The late afternoon sun angled through the trees as I stepped into my backyard, binder in hand and a tension in my shoulders I couldn't quite shake. All day, neighbors had texted, dropped by, or simply nodded with something new in their eyes. Solidarity, maybe, or a hunger for change. The board meeting was over, but everyone in Timber Oaks knew the real confrontation was just hours away. I set my phone on the patio table and dialed Mark. His voice was quieter now, but stronger than before. "You did the right thing," he said, hesitating. "And if you need me up there tomorrow, I'll stand with you." I thanked him, the relief in my chest impossible to hide. I can't do this alone, but together, they don't stand a chance. He chuckled, a rare sound, and promised to bring copies of everything he had. I sat for a while, letting the quiet settle, watching Olivia kick a soccer ball across the grass. My wife joined me, sliding a plate of barbecue onto the table, still warm, still smoky, still ours, no matter what anyone said. "Whatever happens, you already did more than anyone thought possible," she said, squeezing my hand. "The neighborhood's watching." You gave them permission to hope. I nodded, overwhelmed for a moment by how far we'd come. As dusk gathered, the backyard filled with a handful of neighbors. Emily with her notepad, Mrs. Torres from down the street, even the city inspector who stopped by just to confirm the playground would be reviewed in the morning. People brought sweet tea, cold beer, questions, and stories. I realized how rare it was to see the community gathered on this side of the fence, not for an emergency or a holiday, but for each other. Sheriff Daniels texted, "Board's called a public vote tomorrow. I'll be there. Let them try anything." The reassurance was almost enough to let me relax, but I knew the board would try one more maneuver before it was over. The evidence was clear, but people like Patricia never gave up power quietly. As night crept in, he arrived with a folder thick with old emails, budgets, and handwritten notes from meetings he'd attended as a volunteer. "I kept these in case anyone ever cared," he said, setting them on the table with trembling hands. "Guess it's time." We pored over everything together, cross-referencing dates, highlighting signatures, adding last-minute proof to the growing mountain of documentation. Emily listened, scribbling quotes for her article. My wife joined in, recalling details about past repairs and HOA notices we'd overlooked. The more we found, the clearer the pattern: neglect, mismanagement, and a calculated indifference to anything that didn't serve the board's interests. Before midnight, our kitchen was a war room. Binders open, markers scattered, printouts everywhere. We rehearsed what tomorrow would bring: the public vote, the board's last stand, and the possibility, however slim, that Timber Oaks could start over, cleaner and stronger. Olivia wandered in, eyes bright with exhaustion and curiosity. "Is it really almost over?" she asked. I nodded, kneeling beside her. "Almost. And whatever happens, we did what was right, for us and for everyone who was too scared to speak up." She hugged me, and I realized I was shaking. After she went to bed, I stepped outside, the air thick with summer. The quiet felt different, charged but not lonely. I looked up and saw porch lights winking on across the neighborhood. It hit me. This was never just about barbecue or bylaws. It was about who gets to belong, who gets to decide what a community means. I'd fought for my family, but now the whole block was in it together. I checked the evidence pile one last time, then texted Daniels. "We're ready." He replied in seconds. "Let's give them a show." As the clock struck midnight, I finally let myself believe Timber Oaks would never be the same after tomorrow. The next morning, Timber Oaks buzzed with a tension you could taste in the air. I barely touched my coffee. By 8, cars lined both sides of the street near the park, neighbors drifting toward the pavilion. Some in lawn chairs, some with strollers, others just standing in clusters, faces anxious but expectant. You could hear the low hum of whispered conversations and the occasional bark of a dog. The board had called this an emergency session, but everyone knew what it really was: a public reckoning. Sheriff Daniels stood near the entrance, his uniform sharp but his posture relaxed, hands in his pockets, nodding greetings as folks arrived. My reluctant ally and I carried our folders to the front table, nerves buzzing through my fingers. Patricia and her board allies waited behind a folding table, faces set, eyes darting, their usual confidence flickering at the edges. Emily perched on a bench nearby, phone ready, her pen tapping a silent countdown. At exactly 9, Patricia called the meeting to order, her voice just a little too loud through the battery-powered megaphone. "We're here to address repeated non-compliance," she declared, glaring at me over her glasses, "and to vote on further action." But she didn't sound as certain as before. The crowd was bigger, the board smaller. She ran through her list of complaints: grilling, gatherings, unauthorized structures, even excessive aromas. Each accusation felt thinner in the morning light, especially as neighbors shook their heads, whispered, or flat-out laughed. Daniel stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We'll keep things civil," he said evenly, "and I'm here to ensure the process is fair. Nobody's getting bullied out of their rights." She stiffened, but she couldn't push back. My turn came. I stood, my hand steady as I flipped through my files. "You've all seen the violations," I began, voice echoing over the crowd, "but you haven't seen the full story." I held up the original HOA rules, pointing out the lack of any grilling ban, just a vague clause about fire hazards that even the city inspector had dismissed. This isn't about safety. It's about control, about who decides what feels like home. I laid out the records, my own, Mark's, city emails, even the maintenance log showing the board's negligence with community repairs. Emily read a quote from her own email. "If we give him an inch, he'll take a mile." The crowd bristled. You could feel sympathy shifting in the summer heat. The board president tried to cut me off, waving her hand. "The board," she started, but Daniel stopped her. "You've had your say. Let's hear everyone out." One by one, neighbors stood, Mrs. Torres talking about the birthday party she had shut down, another father who'd received threats for hanging a flag, Emily reading statements from others too nervous to attend. The stories added up, each one a crack in the board's foundation. He stood next, voice quiet but clear. I joined the board because I cared about this place. But I can't stand by while it gets weaponized against good people. We need transparency. We need change. The crowd murmured approval. Even some of the board members looked uneasy now. Patricia's fingers tightened around her pen. If you people let this slide, the neighborhood will fall apart, she snapped, but Daniels just smiled, folding his arms. Or maybe it'll finally start to come together. I turned, meeting the eyes of every neighbor who'd ever looked away, hoping to stay out of trouble. If you're tired of being afraid, now's the time to speak up. This is your home, too. I saw heads nod, a few tears, and even some applause. When she called for a vote, removal, fines, restrictions, the result was swift. Hands shot up all over the pavilion, some shaky, some defiant, but all together. Daniels counted twice, just to be sure. The board's motion fails, he announced, and by majority, we'll be electing a new committee at the next meeting. The silence after the vote felt electric. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then neighbors began to clap, a few at first, then louder, until the applause filled the park. The sound was rough, uneven, but real. Kids shouted, someone laughed through tears, and even the most reserved neighbors joined in, clapping for themselves as much as for me. In that moment, the old fear was gone, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years. Pride in where we lived and who we decided to become. The board president power cracked, right there in front of everyone. She slumped in her chair, face ashen, lips pressed in a hard line. Mark clapped me on the back. Emily grinned, cheeks wet. My wife hugged me hard, and Olivia burst into happy tears. I let myself smile, just a little. But inside, relief and exhaustion washed through me like a summer rain. As neighbors swarmed around us, sharing thanks, stories, and fresh hope, I realized we'd done more than save a barbecue. We'd saved a piece of ourselves, and given Timber Oaks a future again. The meeting dissolved in a blur of handshakes, laughter, and long overdue relief. It felt like waking up from a long nightmare, one where you forgot what your own voice sounded like until suddenly, you could hear it ringing out in a crowd. Patricia's allies packed up their folders in stiff, embarrassed silence. Some slipped quietly away, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. Others lingered, faces flushed, as neighbors offered cautious smiles and hesitant invitations for coffee, as if testing out a new reality where everyone might actually get along. Daniels moved through the crowd, giving a few reassuring pats on the shoulder and gentle jokes about keeping the peace, one burger at a time. He paused beside me, offering a nod of respect that felt more like a passing of the torch than anything official. "Told you this town still had some backbone left," he murmured. Emily caught it on her phone, grinning as she texted the clip to Olivia. My reluctant ally stood a little apart, watching with a quiet pride. For months he'd been the conflicted voice on the board, but now he was surrounded by grateful neighbors, some offering thanks, others quietly apologizing for not speaking out sooner. "You did more than save a barbecue, man," he said when he finally reached me. "You gave folks permission to live out loud again." We walked home slowly, the air thick with the scent of charcoal and fresh-cut grass. Kids raced ahead, chasing soccer balls through the yards, their laughter a kind of music I hadn't realized I missed. Emily walked beside me, hand in mine, her smile lighter than I'd seen in months. Olivia bounced along, one arm hooked around her grandmother's shoulders. For the first time in a long time, the world felt possible. That afternoon, the grill was fired up again. No threats, no fines, just neighbors coming together for the sheer joy of it. Someone brought over a tray of lemonade. Another family added their own plate of kebabs to the spread. Daniels, off duty now, accepted a burger with a wink and sat at our old picnic table. The conversation ranged from recipes to childhood memories, the kind of easy storytelling that builds a neighborhood out of strangers. Even Mark's kids, once wary, joined in the laughter as the sky darkened and paper lanterns flickered to life along the fences. As night fell, I wandered to the edge of my yard, looking out over Timber Oaks. Porch lights blinked on one by one, each a small act of defiance and hope. Patricia's house was dark, its windows closed, its lawn immaculate but empty. I wondered if, someday, she'd find her way back to this new version of the community. For now, it was enough that the board's grip had finally loosened, the old fears replaced by something fragile and new. Olivia tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, play the song," she pleaded, eyes bright. Emily joined her, and together we sat by the fire pit as I strummed the guitar I'd almost forgotten I owned. The notes drifted up into the night, drawing a few curious neighbors closer. There was no need to play quietly. No one was counting decibels. For once, there was nothing to hide. As I played, the crowd grew, voices blending, clapping, even a little off-key singing. It was imperfect, but it was ours. Mark toasted with his lemonade, Daniels hummed along, and Emily leaned her head on my shoulder. In that moment, the fight, the fear, and the endless rules faded. All that mattered was right here, the warmth, the sound, the sense that home meant something again. We'd fought for more than a barbecue or a backyard. We'd fought for the freedom to belong, to remember, to celebrate the messy, beautiful life we share. Timber Oaks would never be the same, not after tonight. I hope the story would echo through every house that had ever gone quiet from fear. Maybe it would even give someone else the courage to take their own stand. Would you have stood your ground? Like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments how you'd handle an HOA Karen on your doorstep. The night ended not with a gavel, but with the music of neighbors, together at last, under a sky wide open with possibility.